For Be the Media, I'm Todd Stauffer. Maple Walker Lloyd is Senior Director of Development at Block Club Chicago, a nonprofit news outlet in the Windy City. She was recently named Nonprofit News Emerging Leader of the Year by the Institute for Nonprofit News. I talked to her about Block Club, getting started in nonprofit journalism, and tips for dealing with funders and foundations. When I started a publication, we called it the Jackson Free Press. You know, people call things like the Gazette, the Register, the Advertiser. Where did the name Block Club come from, and how did this thing get started?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Todd, the name originated because block clubs are so important to Chicago. And just in general, when you think of a block club, what do? So they look out for their neighbors, they essentially take care of their neighbors, right? And so that was the meaning behind Block Club Chicago's name. And then just to provide some context around our origin story. So prior to Block Club Chicago launching, there was an organization, a news outlet called DNA Info. Same concept as Block Club Chicago, where our reporters are embedded in the communities that they cover. But the difference was DNA Info was owned by a hedge fund. And the site abruptly shut down one day. All of the editors and reporters and staff lost their job. And so that was back in 2018. And Chicagoans had lost all their local news. And so it was a hole, it was a void, it was a gap. And so many people wanted something similar. And so the editors of DNA Info launched Block Club Chicago, but instead of it being for profit, it became nonprofit. And so Block Club literally picked up where DNA Info left off, again, embedding reporters in the communities that they cover and building trust. And so our reporters are all over the neighborhoods doing that neighborhood hyper-local reporting that is so important to Chicagoans, and not necessarily focusing on crime or violence, but really stories that are impacting our neighbors and our residents and things that they want to see.
So I think, we hear this frequently in the industry that nonprofit is not a business model. It's the way that you organize a corporation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nonprofit is not, okay, now I get to go report and the money just comes in. So talk
Mm-hmm.
about being a professional development person and working in media. Like, how important is that? How does it work? What is it like to really run a nonprofit organization well?
Yeah. Being a development professional, Todd, honestly, it is no easy feat. It takes a lot of effort, relationship building. And oftentimes when you think of a development director or, a development staffer, you think, oh my goodness, fundraiser. And, a lot of journalists, they don't have a fundraising background. So it's also important to have, a dedicated fundraiser to do this work. But a lot of times people, may think, oh my goodness, a fundraiser, like what does this work entail? And fundraising is not necessarily about raising dollars. It is about building connections and relationships and networking. And then the money over time will come. And to answer your other question about nonprofit, our model is specific to our ecosystem, to the Chicago ecosystem. When Block Club initially launched, most of our revenue came from our subscribers. Our subscribers supported our work. We were over 70% reader funded. And that was crucial because when DNA Info closed, so many Chicagoans lost, again, hyper local neighborhood news. And so they wanted that. And so our model was built about built around the needs and the structure of Chicagoans. And then slowly over the years, our revenue pie has shifted. We have a sales team, our grants, we've raised more dollars in grants, our individual donors, our major donors. And then, we have somebody who's dedicated to our subscriptions. So we're slowly starting to see our pie shift. We always had a goal of 25, 25, 25, 25, and we're almost there. But nonprofit, for us specifically, the model works because we know we will always be backed and supported by our readers.
So, and I think that's a really important point that that anybody who wants to start, frankly, for or nonprofit these days in media, should think about. If you can get your readers to back you, you can show that you can at least, pay the light bill because you've got readers who support what you do. Then you're really doing two things. You are justifying that market, right? You're showing that there's like customer market fit. And when you go out to philanthropy, and I think this is a step sometimes that folks miss, they're like, oh, okay, I started a nonprofit organization. Now I just need my $100,000 from Press Forward or my 250,000 from MacArthur, or I'm ready, right? It seems to me, you tell me, but if you have these other types of revenue lined up and you're showing that, that probably makes it easier to talk to some of those funders.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It definitely makes it easy. But I'll even go back one point, Todd, that you mentioned. I think the biggest takeaway from this that many publishers and newsroom leaders really need to think about is the work, right? The reason why Block Club readers and subscribers support us is because our work resonates with the community, right? So that first and foremost, that should really be your bread and butter. And then essentially everything else will fall into place. So really making sure the work is there to give your readers something to support.
I think that there's sometimes a mindset, I don't know, a psychological for some journalists where they're like, well, what if people won't pay me for what I do? Like, what if what I'm doing isn't, and you hear that a lot around subscription. Now, one of the things I'm interested in you, because you keep saying you have the subscribers. Does being a subscriber at Block Club get you any different content, or does it just get you other VIP benefits? How does that work?
Yeah. So, and we're still, I think every year, and it's okay to say this, that we're still fleshing that out to see what it looks like year after year. But one of the things specifically that our subscribers get, that if you're not a subscriber, they get access to special newsletters that specifically focus on their neighborhoods and their content. But I also want to be clear in our structure too. We also have what's called a freemium content model. So most of our coverage is free. Elections, South and West Side coverage, breaking news. Most of our coverage is free, but as a subscriber, you do get special perks. With our sales team, you'll get entered into certain raffles because you're a subscriber, or events that we hold. You'll get invited or special invitations to those things. So I think it's a evolving model, something that we're constantly thinking through about how we can offer certain benefits and perks to our subscribers.
So, in going back to the idea of being a nonprofit, something that I like to say a lot, and hopefully you support me in this, is it's important not just to be a good journalistic outlet. As a nonprofit journalistic outlet, you need to be a good nonprofit. And you can actually learn from, in my market, I'm in Jackson, Mississippi. I always reference like the Mississippi Museum of Art, the Mississippi Children's Museum, some organizations that I've seen over the last 20 plus years do a phenomenal job of making people feel welcome, making their benefactors, putting their names in front of people, giving them special, whatever it is, wine and cheese kind of parties or whatever. But, and it's developing people from small donors into larger donors. It's developing people from, free newsletter subscribers to paid or,
Hmm.
VIP members or whatever it is. Talk a little bit about how you think as a nonprofit development specialist, how does, what's the mix between being a nonprofit and being a journalistic outlet, and where do they kind of overlap?
Yeah, good question, Todd. So I really think there's a few things with this. It kind of goes back to what I was saying before about how um, the organization, when it comes to engaging, whether it's with your subscribers, your readers, your funders, donors, it is really about relationship building. That should be the foundation or the ground to then establish long-term relationships, or even being able to bump somebody up from $100 to then $500. A lot of this is just relationships. But then also, I think it's okay to survey your readers too, right? What is it that they want to see? I think, with journalism, we've been, for so many years, we were stuck into this, in this box of, a competition. We've got to be the first to get to the breaking news story, or, journalism has to be told like this. But there's so many new innovative ideas that are coming up, especially in the nonprofit space specifically, but really engaging with your readers. What is it that they want to see? What's important to them? And then how can you go beyond just journalism to let your readers know that you're there to engage with them, right? There's so many community engagement activities and events that you really want to include your readers on, right? I think journalism, again, has been stuck in this box for so long where we have to report the news and we have to tell the stories, but there's so much more that can be done beyond the headlines and just telling stories.
And I think that also, you were talking about surveying earlier. I think that
Mhm.
that actually fits into that mix as well. It's like
Yeah.
you can get people to pay you for things that they need or that they want, but if you
Mhm.
don't know what those things are, then sometimes it that'll mess with your model a little bit. Back in the
Mhm.
day, if you were selling an ad to the car dealer in order to fund your journalism, that was a different relationship that you had with your reader, as
Mhm.
opposed to now where you kind of need their buy-in. You kind of need them to believe in what you're doing.
Yeah, and Todd, I just quickly want to touch on that point too. Sometimes I think newsroom leaders are often intimidated or scared to ask their readers what they need. And I think it does the newsroom such a disservice. If there's something that you need, or that you're looking for your readers, tell them. Like, if you're trying to reach a certain milestone, a new goal, if you're trying to hire a reporter or explore a new coverage area, tell your readers, your subscribers, the foundations, the people that you're engaging with on a regular basis, tell them what you need. Oftentimes they don't know unless you speak. And so sometimes I've seen over the years that there's been so many reservations about asking, because newsroom leaders think that they're asking too much or too often, but you can never ask too much or too often. Just tell folks what you need, and you'll certainly be surprised as to who comes through to support you.
So now you're taking me in two different directions. So one thing, so let's talk about this, and then I'll try to come back to the other. The
Okay.
first is with Block Club in particular. Do
Yes.
you all think about, editorial voice? There's a lot of discussion right now about, legacy media maybe needs to sound more like creators, more like influencers, more one to one, more give and take. How do you all think about that at Block Club? Do you want to feel like a newspaper talking to people, or can you get conversational enough in what you try to do?
Yeah, so we are here for the readers. And that is truly what it boils down to. And you can see that with our content and how our reporters engage with our readers. And one thing that specifically comes to mind that I absolutely love. So, with our neighborhood newsletters and even with our daily newsletter, our reporters always start off their newsletters 9 times out of 10 with a topper. And that topper is so conversational and converses with the audience. It makes them feel included. And so that is our bread and butter. We don't want to make ourselves think that we're too high on the totem pole and we're talking down to everyone. It is very one-on-one. We're very engaged with our readers, and we want to make sure we're connecting and having conversations with them like you would your family or your friends. Hopefully
Yeah.
that answered your
No, it did.
question,
And
Todd.
that's kind of the angle that some folks are taking is there a way to just be a trusted
Mhm.
person who is letting people know the things that they don't have time to go figure out on their own? You went down and figured something out at City Hall, or you figured something out at a neighborhood association meeting, and they didn't have time for it, so you're sharing that information.
And I think it's also about access to Todd. So, like, our reporters are very accessible. So, when we say that our reporters are embedded in the communities that they cover, that is literally what they do. They're working out of local coffee shops, local schools. And oftentimes they may get on social media and say, "Hey, I'll be at this coffee shop from on this date from X hour to X hour. Come visit me. If you have pitches, would love to hear them." So we always invite our readers to get involved, because at the end of the day, it's about them and not us.
And I think that even kind of plugs back into the conversation about the subscribers or VIP readers or whatever you want to end up calling like your
Mhm.
there's recurring donors to me, however it sets up, is that access can be all the perk you really need, for some levels of VIP reader, where it's like they will help fund your journalism if they know that whether it's coming to the coffee shop or coming to the beer hall or whatever it is, that they can sit down with a reporter and talk to them, or that you're just accessible, whether it's on social media, whether it's in email. All right, let me flip back to my other quiz. Well, I
Okay.
still remember it.
Okay.
Um, as a nonprofit, and then let's get serious about the money for a second.
Okay.
What is the push pull between general operating funds and project stuff? Because you were talking before about, oh, we need a reporter in this area. We want to start covering this topic. That's sometimes that's where the quote unquote easier money is we're going to go cover the environment and we can get an environmental grant. But how does that mix really work for a nonprofit organization?
Yeah. So general operating funds or general operations, for those grants, they literally can be used for anything. Overhead costs, a specific coverage area, you name it. Depending on what the foundation's funding priorities are, you could essentially use it for whatever your organization needs. And project support, which is also known as unrestricted grants, are typically literally for something very, very specific. So, again, if you're looking to increase the capacity of your newsroom or a specific coverage area, it is very, very specific. And I've seen over the past few years that a lot of foundations are shifting more towards project based grants as opposed to general operations. I mean, we all wish we could all funding was general operations, but that is not the case. So, really, just looking at the needs of your organization to determine if the funding priorities of the organization and what they're offering is suitable for your newsroom.
And it's definitely not one size fits all, but I
Mhm.
encourage folks when they're running a nonprofit organization to think about how much general operating can they get outside of grant funding, and then can they augment what they do with grant funding, because to your point, it's frequently project driven, it can
Yep.
be restricted funds, but that also the it- you know grant funding like that from big organizations can often be big dollars that can go away, right? So 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, when their funding priorities change, when they get new leadership, when they get other parts of the state or the country that they're responsible for, they may take your funding and say, "We gave you 3 years of 250,000 a year. Hopefully that helped a whole lot." You
Mhm.
need to be able to do your basics right on some other level of funding. So to when you're talking about going 25, 25, 25, 25, explain that really quickly again. What is the goal right now for Block Club when you're trying to, do the different legs of
Yeah.
the stool?
Yeah. I think to your point, Todd, it is crucial for an organization not to rely on one source of revenue. Now, that may be the case for nascent startup newsrooms. You may have no choice but to rely. Either you're going to be heavily funded for grants or, heavily supported by your readers. But definitely over time, you want to spread that out because, to your point, when the money is gone, a foundation may come in and say, we're only giving you 3 years. So you've got to be able to raise enough money to then support that loss that you're no longer going to receive after the length of the grant. And so fortunately for Block Club, we were able to get a significant grant from the American Journalism Project to build out our revenue team. But leading up to that, before that, it was crucial for us to slowly and methodically move away from the support of our readers instead of solely relying on that reader revenue to then branch out and get more grants and to work on sales and advertising. So it took us a while. It's not something that happens overnight, but we knew we could not solely rely on our reader support, which is why over the years, we've slowly been able to increase other areas of the revenue pie. And I also want to just clarify one thing. I think when I mentioned project support, I might have said unrestricted, but it is also known as restricted funding.
All right. So, the thing that I kind of imagine when I do these is I'm talking to somebody who has had a great deal of success and is part of an organization that's had a lot of success in a relatively short amount of time. But so congratulations. But so you're sitting out there and you're thinking to yourself, I'm listening to this podcast called Be the Media, and I realize that there's a need in my community for these things to get reported and for somebody to focus on this. What's some of the early advice you could give to somebody who is just getting started? They like what Block Club does. They're excited about this kind of new dynamic in media. They thought, they're not even sure to be for-profit or nonprofit. But what is your kind of starter advice for folks?
Yeah. So my starter advice would be to really hone in on what your value proposition is, right? When you are first starting out, you are immediately saying, oh my goodness, I need a bunch of money. I've got to get this, organization off the ground, but really focus on that. What does budgeting look like? What are your expenses, your revenue? That's one category, right? But then who is your target audience? If somebody were to ask you, what does your organization do? What would be your answer? If somebody were to then ask you, how is your organization set apart from the other, newsrooms, in your area or community, what would be your answer? So really honing in on that value proposition and then moving on to the next step. Find out, do your research. If you're looking into, philanthropic funding, find out what other newsrooms, both locally and nationally, are being funded by certain, foundations. Ask for introductions, because again, this goes back to relationship building, right? Relationships with philanthropy or donors or whomever, it is not transactional. You have to build the foundation first. And, look at other organizations, again, whether locally or nationally, who have similar like-minded priorities and missions and goals, and then ask them to make those connections for you. I mean, the worst anyone can say is no. And at the end of the day, we're all in this together. So it really should just be an easy ask or connection. That way other doors can open up for possible revenue generation.